Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be presenting at UserPilot's Product Drive Conference on a topic that I'm really passionate about. We're going to be talking about mastering metrics for product leaders. And I'm Mo. I am the CEO and founder at Product Faculty. Before we get into our presentation, I just wanted to touch on the story of why we started Product Faculty. I started Product Faculty 5 years ago when I was a lead PM instructor and curriculum designer at another popular training school. And at the same time, I was also the first ever product lead at one of North America's largest retailers, helping them launch and grow their online grocery business. And we grew that from 40 million to about $1 billion in 6 years. Now, what I found while I was teaching at this training school was that what we're teaching was great for people to get their first PM job, but it wasn't doing the trick for folks that were already in a product management job. And that's why I started Product Faculty. I wanted to help mid-career senior product managers and product leaders excel in their role. And we've had some really great success here. So let's get into our presentation. So we're going to be talking about mastering metrics, and we're going to be going through this. So first, we're going to go over product growth stages and how to assess how you're doing in those stages by doing a retention analysis. Then we're going to go a little bit more granular and get into how do you go about defining a feature by looking at it from the lens of retention. And further to that, we're going to go even deeper than that by going into a metric analysis toolkit so that you know how to either diagnose what's wrong or improve your product as you need to go ahead and improve it. So why are metrics important? Well, the era of Mad Men style marketing where, a group of executives, come up with a brilliant marketing scheme of how to acquire users and then go to market and expect everyone to buy your product, those days are gone. What we're finding is that those folks that, yes, your intuition is great, your gut can be great, but those that look at data, that go deeper and now analyze their data are becoming a lot more successful. And, you look at the example of something like TikTok, it has gotten to 1 billion users much faster than Facebook. It's valued over $400 billion. And so, you cannot, companies that are not just going off of intuition, but getting deep into the data and understanding the users further are growing a lot faster. And this is also fundamental to the lean life cycle. When you think about build, measure, and learn, you really cannot measure and learn if you don't have any metrics. Essentially, the way that I say it is that if you're not measuring your metrics, you're not even a product manager. You're a project manager. You're just following a project plan. Now, let's look at the definition of what a product metric is. A good metric measures movement towards a product goal. And then if that's the case, well, a product goal should be a leading indicator of the outcomes that you are trying to achieve. Knowing that, let's look at our product growth stages. Look, there are a lot of metrics tools out there. There's Google's Heart Framework and there's AARR. And those frameworks are great, but what they're missing is that they don't tell you what one thing is more important than the rest. And what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at everything from the lens of retention today. Now, generally you can put products into 4 broad categories. There are engagement types products where you're trying to maximize the time on the product. Then there are revenue products where, products like Amazon or Instacart or Uber Eats, where you are essentially trying to get as much revenue from your users. The next type of products are SaaS products, and SaaS products try to either increase overall revenue or help you save money for other users or business, or they help you save time. And then there are utility products, and those are those products that allow you to get something done where there are very few or no alternative. Think of them as the IRS or Department of Motor Vehicles. I mean, if you want to get your license, it's the only place you can go. You can't go anywhere else. Now, turns out that retention can be a strong measure to assess how you're doing in most products. For utility products, it may not be the case, but for most products, retention is an excellent way to see how you're doing across the life cycle. Now, let's go over these product growth stages. When you're launching a product, you essentially start off by having an idea. Then you find product market fit on that idea. Once you found product market fit, you want to optimize and you want to grow and get as much juice out of that product. And finally, you want to innovate and continue to reinvent yourself. The first thing you're doing, the first hurdle that every startup has to go through is they have to go to idea to product market fit. They have to solve for product market fit, which is a very difficult process. Once you've done that, you're optimizing and getting the most out of most segments. And then for long-term viability, you're really reinventing yourself. And as we're going to see today, a retention curve is a powerful tool to help you measure how you're performing in each one of these stages. Now, let's go over what a retention curve is and what it looks like. The definition of a retention curve is that it is looking at the set of users that joined on a certain time period, whether it's over on a certain day, on a certain month, on a certain week, and how often or how many of them are coming back over time. You measure retention in cohorts based on a group of people who start on a specific date range, and then you're seeing them over time. So we're going to go over the autonomy of a retention curve. So a retention curve, this is what the curve looks like. The blue line and what you're measuring is your key action. Your key action, which we're going to go into a little bit further, is the thing that dictates that most of your users are getting value from your product once they perform their key action. For a messaging app, it could be sending at least 3 messages in a session. What you see on the left-hand side of the axis is essentially the percent of users who are retained over time, and then what you're seeing here is that the number of days that they're retained. So you typically look at it over a 28-day period. What this retention curve shows is that 20% of users who joined this cohort are retained over a 30-day period. And this tells you a lot. You can make reinvestment decisions based on this. You can see how fast you're growing. There's a lot that you can do based on this. So let's talk about identifying your key action. When it comes to identifying your key action, what you're doing here is that you want to understand the key action that most of your users perform that gets them to return over and over again. This key action must be discovered, improved, and measured over time. So when it comes to, let's do some examples here. So let's say if you are a product manager at Spotify, your key action can be listening to music, and your key action metric is listening to music for at least 5 minutes. If you are a product leader at Instacart, and which the key action is shopping for groceries, the key action metric can be placing an order. For YouTube, it's watching videos, and then the key action metric is essentially watching videos for at least 5 minutes. What do you think the key action is for Facebook? Well, people are, the key action that they're doing is essentially scrolling their feed, and that is a good indicator of them getting value. And then the key action metric here could be that they're scrolling the feed for 30 seconds. What you want to make sure is that most of your users are doing this. If you pick a key action that very few users are doing, then it's not a good key action to pick. So how do you know based on a retention curve if you found product market fit? So we're going to show you 2 retention curves here. Product A, essentially what you're seeing here is that 100% of users joined on a certain date, and about 18 days later, there's 0 left. Product B, you have 100% of users that joined on day 1, and then you're seeing over time around 35 to 40% of users are still in the product, and they remain. And so what we can see here is that product A does not have product market fit, and product B does have product market fit. And Alex Schultz, who is a VP of growth at Facebook, really kind of evangelized this approach of looking at your growth in a product. So once you know that you found product market fit, the next step is to optimize your product to make sure that you're getting the maximum juice out of your current product, and you're identifying new segments too. So once you found product market fit, the first thing you want to do is you want to improve the retention for your existing users to make sure that they're getting the most amount of value for it from your product. And the second is you want to identify new personas and make sure that they have sufficient retention as well. Let's look at the first use case. The first use case essentially is that you're looking at your retention curve, and what we're seeing is for persona A, previously 20% of users that joined the cohort were retained over a 30-day period, and now 30% of your users are retained over a 30-day period. So you can see the improvement in retention that has happened. Once you have really just maximized your retention for your core user base, you want to identify new personas and make sure that you can achieve sufficient retention for them. So an example here is of persona B. So first, what we see is that persona B, after 15 days, there's no users left. You can make some product improvements and improve that retention so that even persona B now has found product market fit, where you have around 15 to 20% retention over a 30-day period. So that's an example of identifying a new persona that hadn't found product market fit or had poor retention, and you improve the retention curve by understanding that user base and making improvements onto the product. And the result of it is a better retention. We're going to look at some the ways that to do that. We're going to look at the analytics or the analysis that you have available to you to help you do that a little later in this presentation. Now, this is all great. You have found product market fit. You have optimized that retention curve, and you've found new personas and you've optimized those. That's not enough. If you want to solve for long-term viability, you have to be able to innovate. And this is essentially the Nokia CEO when they were bought by Microsoft. They said we did nothing wrong and somehow we lost. This is why it's so important to continuously reinvest to make sure that you are finding new business models that keep you viable long into the future. And I'd say Google is a perfect example of this. So Google essentially was set up, about 10 years ago. They split up the company into Alphabet A and Alphabet B. And what they did was they said Alphabet A is going to focus on the core business of Google, and Alphabet B is going to focus on moonshot thinking. And moonshot thinking isn't just nice to have, it's a requirement. And essentially, what moonshot thinking said was, look, we're going to be working on innovations that are different from our core product, but we feel that, and these innovations may make your finance department nervous, but we feel that this is where the next Google is going to come from. The next billion users, the next Google is going to come from these moonshots. And we want the room and we want the ability to be able to make those investments. And so folks that were investing in the Google stock had the option of either, knowing what part of it is Alphabet A and what part of it is Alphabet B, which is going to be a little bit more risky. Now, what we just saw here is that just irrespective of the product growth stage that you're in, the retention curve is a powerful tool to help you to know how you're performing across all these stages. There are different ways of calculating retention. The most common way of calculating retention is end day retention, and that essentially specifies that you have a certain amount of users on day one. How many of those users came back over the end day period? So this is good for products where you do expect a habitual nature of using the product. You expect folks that use Spotify to come back on a regular basis, Netflix to come back on a regular basis. The other type of retention, which is less common, is unbounded retention. And the unbounded retention essentially shows you the percentage of users that came back on a specific day or later. And you can think of this as the opposite of churn. And so, an example here is that day 7 retention shows users that came back on day 7, or they could have come back on day 8, day 9, day 10, and they would still be counted under day 7 retention. Now let's talk about benchmarking. How do you know that you're doing well? Mixpanel has done a great study on this across industries, and what they found is that if you are at the 50th percentile Your 8 week retention is, depending on industry, roughly below 20% for most industries. So that's sort of the your if you are at the 50th percentile. But what if you're elite? What if you're at the 90th percentile? Then obviously retention is a little better, and this is just showing the retention depending on the industry that you're in. So you can know how you're doing if you've launched a new product. You can see whether you found product market fit or not based on essentially looking at your retention curves. Now let's go a little bit more granular. As a product manager, what you're doing is you're launching features, and that's the core of what you're going to be doing. And we're going to be looking at this process of defining your launch metrics, but putting a lens of retention on it. So the first thing you want to do is you want to understand the business objective of your role. Then you want to define a retention metric. You want to define a guardrail metric, and then you want to launch, measure, and iterate. When it comes to understanding your business goal, let's look at some examples here. So let's say if you are a product manager for a music streaming app and your role is a product manager for search. You could be launching a feature that allows you to search for artists by location. If you are a PM at a mobile shopping app for payments, you could be adding a new payment option, American Express, during the checkout journey. And finally, if you are a product manager for integrations, you could be leading the integration for Zapier. When it comes to defining your retention metric, here are some examples. So if you're a PM for search, your hypothetical retention metric could be you want at least 1% of search volume to use search by artist location over a 30-day period. If you don't meet that, then it doesn't meet your requirements. If you are a product manager for payments, you want at least 2% of the payment volume to use Amex over a 3-month period. And finally, if you are a B2B CRM product manager, then you want at least 5% of folks to use a Zapier integration. Now, having goals and defining retention metrics are great, but you also want to define guardrail metrics. These are things that you want to watch out for. Guardrail metrics are essentially those metrics that you want something to happen, but you don't want it to happen at the expense of something else. So those are things that you want to watch out for. So for the music streaming app, even though you want 1% of your search volume to be done by search by artist location over a 30-day period, but by adding this search option, you don't want search to become so complicated that users begin to abandon it overall. So you want to make sure that search abandonment doesn't go up. When it comes to having Amex as a payment option, you want to make sure that cannibalization does for other payment methods isn't more than 10% because Amex has high payment fees. And finally, as Zapier, if you are leading Zapier integration, you want to make sure that page abandonment doesn't go up because of the paradox of choice. If users have so much choice on what type of payment method that they're going to be using. So these are just hypothetical guardrail metrics based on what is important to your business. Once you have that, you go ahead and you'll launch, measure, and iterate to see how you're doing. Now, when you launch, measure, and iterate, when it comes to measuring and iterating, it really comes down to analyzing, doing analysis, and this is where the metric analysis toolkit can help you. At the end of the day, what you're doing as a product manager is you're either trying to improve your product or you're trying to troubleshoot what is wrong. And in order to successfully do this, you have to be able to perform a sound analysis around your context and situation to understand how to improve what's going on. And it can seem overwhelming because there's so many ways that you can analyze, you can perform this analysis, but what we'll show you is that there are generally just 5 types of analysis that you need to do to get a complete picture of how your feature is performing. Number 1 is segmentation. Look, PMs fall into the trap of this. It's, you're so busy, there's so much going on, and it's easy to look at averages, but averages don't go deep enough. You have to segment. You can segment based on persona, product analytics type. You can segment based on any attribute you like. Here's an example of segmenting based on playing a song, but based on genre essentially. Then the next type of 5S analysis is straight path. All of you users are either trying to go through common paths, which most people go through, or critical paths that everybody has to go through. You can think of onboarding as a critical path that everyone has to go through, and you can think of search as a common path that most people go through, but not everyone, because you can search or you can browse. And here's an example of doing some funnel analysis based on a common path. The next is session-based. For all products, there's two things. You're either trying to increase the amount of time spent on product for engagement type products, or for SaaS or productivity software, you're trying to decrease the amount of time spent on the product. And so session-based analysis is another type of analysis that you can perform. And here we're just showing the average session distribution. The next is selection. As product managers, you're constantly trying to launch new features. So understanding how your users adopt these features is critical to your success. So feature adoption metrics is an example of that. And you can have a hypothesis around what you're doing when you're launching a product. And finally, satisfaction. This is essentially a positive customer experience, or even at a feature level, a positive feature experience can be a great indicator of whether they're going to be able to stay in your product and talk about your product to others. And the two types of analysis here are NPS, loyalty, and CSAT, satisfaction. And here's an example of an NPS question. So at the end of the day, you're doing all of this to make sure that you have a strong retention curve. And this is important because, look, the era of madman type marketing, where you can just build something, advertise it, and expect users to show up is gone. And those companies that are getting more surgical, understanding their data, are becoming more successful. And nothing makes this more clear than recent successes like TikTok, which is valued over $1 billion, which is valued over $400 billion and has over 1 billion users. So hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you do have questions, please do reach out. And if you want to know more about product faculty, happy to chat more about that as well. We do have an upcoming cohort in January. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending this session, and hope you enjoy it. And feel free to connect with me, and happy to chat further about any of this. Thank you.